Got her.
All right, it's 9 o'clock, everyone. We're going to go ahead and get started. If you are on this meeting in some way, shape, or form, you will be administering hockey section tournaments here this year. Thanks for doing so. It's January 18th. One month from today, girls hockey will be finishing up their section tournaments. So that's where we're at. Hopefully this is good information here for you today. If there's something you missed or someone that missed this, we are going to be recording this meeting to assist those that, or for you even to reference in the future. From our office, obviously we have Susie. Susie sent out a wealth of information along with forms for you that we'll work through. Laura's here from our office. She's going to talk about the website and discuss opportunities as soon as this afternoon for training on that, getting our information into the website. We also have Carmen Middleton is intern from the University of Minnesota. Welcome, Carmen. Looks like she's joining our call today. I'm working from a single screen here at my house, actually, before I fly out to Indianapolis for a baseball rules meeting. So I'm going to work right off the agenda. Susie is going to share that agenda. Not ideally how I like to operate during these calls, but we're going to have to make do with what we have here today. You're going to see our contact information throughout this. Sounds like Matt Percival and Jeff Whistler are our state tournament manager. Managers will be joining us later in the call as well. Bill Kronschnabel is our all things rules and officials. Also has a more than 40-year knowledge of our tournaments here. So any of these people will assist you to get through our tournaments here this year. Obviously, for our meeting here today, you have received this information. You have our agenda right now. Make sure you and anybody else involved making decisions in that tournament knows where your hockey rules and policies are, has a copy of those, and has went through those prior to the tournament. The COVID interruption document and COVID guidance is located here. Make sure you know where to find those on the webpage as well. If and when those change or are modified, we'll do our best to get that information out to you, but just be aware of where we are currently at. And actually, we may get to this later in the agenda as well. I'm just going to walk through with where we're at with COVID guidance right now. Starting with the interruption guidance, and we don't have to share that right now, Susie. I'll talk through it, but the link is here. This is not changed from a year ago. So I had a request last night from our dance coaches that we allow less than 5 dancers to participate because the flu and COVID are hitting teams. We have not made any rules changes to our sport specific rules and policies and or rules of the game when it comes to hockey this year. Understand what the interruption guidance is and what it means. If your team or if an individual, seems to be more the flavor this year than a year ago, is unable to participate during postseason, they are eliminated from postseason competition, especially with the team. There's potential that a student athlete who is unable to participate could participate later in the tournament, depending on when they come down with whatever ailment or injury that they have. We'll talk about that later. But teams that are not eligible to participate on the date of and time of the contest that you are going to play no longer have the opportunity to compete in that postseason. COVID guidance, we shared this on Lead last week. There's a FAQ that will be coming out, not necessarily for you, absolutely not for you to administer, is somebody else's COVID guidance. All right, so the CDC changed their guidance basically to say this: after 5 days, depending on how you look at day 0, it'd be 6 days. you could return to school fully masked. All right, that mask is a requirement. Days 6 through 10, there's a potential that student athletes could practice, but competition is not allowed. One of the things that I've learned or read, and depending on how you read it, it says that in the CDC guidance that travel should not take place. Right now, I think that was intended for like me traveling to Indianapolis later here today, but it also supports where we're at. Our guidance, knowing what it is, has not changed. For the 10 days upon a positive test, student athletes will not compete, meaning they aren't traveling to other schools. There isn't the potential, hopefully, for them to infect or spread COVID with other competition or officials or workers, whatever the case may be. We also have sports like wrestling, gymnastics, and swimming, which pose difficulties in managing that mask wearing. For those that were part of tournaments last year, you know, competing with a mask in the sport of hockey was futile, to say probably the best as to how we did last year, especially on the boys' side of things. Understand that guidance, know what that says. It is up to the school administrative team to determine whether or not a student athlete is eligible. That's not yours. They may come to you with questions for clarification. That may be one that you want to come back to me on to assist you through that. I'm going to pause there just for a moment around letters C and D. At any time, feel free to unmute and stop me. Try and do so at the numbers in between we get a natural break. But I'm going to pause there, take a drink of my coffee, and open it up for any questions around the interruption guidance or the actual COVID guidance for participation at this time. Well, either I said that really well, or you've got it under control and heard it multiple times, or we're still a month away and you're thinking that things may change before then. Emergency protocols, making sure that you have plans in place, right? For that catastrophic, whatever may occur. AEDs, make sure your trainers, everybody knows what their emergency action plan is. Everything from sudden cardiac arrest to an ambulance needing to be called. This is something, lives have been saved in hockey arenas over the last 2 years for how you respond. We get a lot of questions right now with the unfortunate loss of an athlete out in Connecticut who took a blade to the throat. Again, how do we respond in situations like that to make sure that we have the utmost care for our student athletes and our coaches? Also, what do you do in case of a spectator? I think it was a year ago, maybe 2 years ago at Minnetonka, where they had a site manager in place, a emergency action plan in place, and they saved the life of a spectator. Again, what happens if that spectator goes down in your arenas versus something that occurs on the ice, and how are you going to manage that and be prepared? Always make sure that we have those NFHS hockey rules books along with our rules and policies. We'll talk about overtime procedures. State adoption is different. Every state can be different on their overtime policies. So that's an example of where you go to rules and policies versus the hockey rules book. So those are all tools for you to have. I'm going to call on Laura here in just a minute, but making sure that you have access to your website to work, making sure the information is in that website. We're ready to go once we finish that section tournament. So we're able to prepare moving forward for that tournament with things like online programs and other information that will be added in there. Please note, and Laura will probably mention this as well, again this afternoon via Zoom, there is a website opportunity for training that I believe Laura will be hosting as well. Because Laura is here and maybe Carmen as well, Laura, I'm going to turn it over to you to talk all things website access and information at this time.
Great. Thanks, Bob, and good morning, everyone. So a few things to note this morning. Number one is make sure that you have been assigned to your section tournament and can see a tournament personnel dashboard with that assignment on. That assignment helps our staff know that you are managing that tournament and facilitates Susie's communication with you. but it also gives you the resources for your tournament. The COVID protocol documents that Bob mentioned, if you are an AD, you have access to those from your AD dashboard. However, if you are a section manager who is not an AD, you also see those linked on your tournament dashboard. So while Bob has linked them here, know that all of our COVID documents are in one spot, and you can find them from that tournament personnel dashboard. As tournament personnel, there are 3 things we're looking for from you for the website. And for some of you, you may share these duties with your region secretary. So work with them to make sure that you are managing these 3 pieces. Number 1 is to make sure that the dates and locations are available and viewable on the public website. Secondly, you're going to use the section resources to share information with your section teams. And then thirdly is to make sure that your brackets are updated. Today at noon, we're going to do about a 45-minute session that walks through each of these ideas and shows you both how to do them and how that information displays on the public website for you. We will record that session. So if you're unable to jump in and join us at noon, you can go back and review that later. I'll ask Susie to send out that information to each of you after that session so that you have that available. So please, if you're available today at noon, I'll throw that in the chat here, that invite, in case you have not seen that from your region secretary, but would invite you to join us at noon. Some of you who have done fall tournaments, those 3 tasks you're looking at and saying, I know how to do those, absolutely, you're good to go. But we do get a number of people who are jumping into a tournament for the first time in the winter. So again, look forward to seeing a number of you at noon today, and I will put that invitation information in the chat right now. Bob, I'll go back to you to continue on with the agenda.
Good, thank you very much, Laura. Thanks for all your work on that. We appreciate those that are on the call here, getting us the correct information as timely as possible so we can prepare for an incredible state tournament again this year. We're going to get into consistency and communication. That's why we're here today. Everybody hears the same message, and we know to talk to who when that time comes when you have questions. I would always want to hear from more than one person if something out of the ordinary happens, but try and work through that chain of communications to make sure the right people know we're not triangulating each other or putting you in a position that someone is missing that message. If something happens with a team and I need to work with you or a region secretary, I'm happy to do that. We're going to work with those administrators first, coaches secondary, and the ADs prior to those coaches. So just understand how that works, making sure that who you contact and when, right? Start at the local site level, work with that tournament manager and the site manager to the tournament manager, then to the region secretary. I'm not the last line of defense, but I should be hearing from somebody well after the event has taken place. And when you cannot handle a situation or don't have the answers for the situations, you have a great sense of when I need to be aware of that, or when one of us needs to assist you, whether it's myself or Matt Percival, Jeff Whistler, as we get closer to that tournament. Before seeding, make sure all teams are participating in the section tournament. This is going to be a year, I think, when it's pretty fluid again, as teams may struggle with numbers, may struggle with situations in terms of potentially even coaches. Making sure that you know who is going to participate in that state tournament or that section tournament as we get going. Site managers may be different than our tournament managers in many cases. Making sure your site managers have been assigned, have all the right information. Whenever possible, and I would say pretty much mandatory, you don't have a coach participating in that tournament as your site manager. If there is a situation where it becomes a conflict, it's really difficult if it is a coach within that tournament. As it notes there, make sure Susie has cell phone numbers for all site managers. If something occurs and we need to get a hold of you, that we have access to all of our site managers, please send those to Susie. We have what's called management keys. I'm going to call it best practices. You have that document. Looks very much similar to our agenda today. We'll show this after our agenda just to make sure we run through and you know what that looks like. That's something that can be shared again with all involved in your tournament in terms of who needs what, right? When in doubt, again, we talked about that communication chain. Who do you contact when? I do not need to be asked whether or not a skate sharpener can be brought into the arena for your section tournament. That'd be a good example of something you can handle on your end. But if there is a conflict or if there's something that you need help with, let us assist you. We're here for you, again, with questions and or concerns. You have our information there. Put those into your cell phones if you need, and we'll take that call from you. I would prefer if it's you that's making that call as opposed to a coach, definitely not a parent in situations. Those numbers are for you to utilize as we work through the tournaments. Again, Laura talked about reporting of results as quickly as we can with those final scores. It says immediately after that competition will assist us greatly. All right, I'm going to pause there. Any questions at this time? All right, hopefully we're talking about something that will not occur, but there's probably not as many a year where a section tournament hasn't experienced an ejection. Make sure again under number 2 there that DQs are reported to Susie. We want to make sure that we have those, especially in between those rounds, right? Between a section round and a state round, or even between a semifinal and a final. Understand that when there is an ejection, know what type of ejection it is. More often than not, an ejection will lead to the remainder of that game and the next game. Those are not appealable, right? So when asked, there's no appeals around ejections. We went through, I think Ted Schultz is on this call, what I would call an elongated ejection process that took place during football, went all the way to the courts, and we were tested on that. And again, the courts ruled in our favor in terms of where we're at with our ejection policy. So know what that policy is, know the difference between the number of penalties and how that is different in rules and policies versus a DQ or an ejection for hockey. Again, we talked about consistency and communication. Use the agenda in any of your notes. All of the documents that are included here. Understand the rules book, understand ejections. And again, as I mentioned, there are no appeals. All right, rules and policies is going to be something that you're going to rely on. Make sure there's consistency and communication that goes out to those teams. All right, this is what will occur at our state tournaments, and it would be greatly appreciated if this is what you're using at your section tournaments, right? I know there are some that choose not to do so. That makes it very difficult and very confusing, and you're also giving up potential dollars, I would say, for your tournaments if we are not following that official roster. You have 20 in uniform. You have 3 coaches, not 5, right? Like we try and see at some of our state tournaments. 3 coaches, 2 student managers, right? Those managers are students and not the goalie coach or the shooting coach or the face-off coach. Again, those are student managers to assist them. Make sure that all are in 7th grade or above. That's a catastrophic insurance issue for us with the State High School League and for our regions. Again, we do not want to hear about at the state tournament that something different occurred during your section tournament. Consistency is key. Nip that early, get that communication out. And when they show up, make sure that your site managers are aware of this and are able to handle that as well. All right, so 3 on that bench. We talked about the COVID guidance, making sure that your coaches are certified. All right, now, Laura, we had a question yesterday in dance, if there is a way for a tournament manager to see a list or to be able to see, compare, coaches that are on a roster with who's certified. It is the role of the member school, the admin for that team, to make their coaches are certified. When in question, Laura, I'm not aware of people on this call able to access other schools certified list of coaches. But if there is a question, that's something we can look up for you as well. But make sure that all coaches are certified. Something we're hearing this year as well, obviously with COVID, if the head coach who is certified and a certified head coach has gone through everything according to state statute, goes down due to COVID, let's say, you need a certified person, I would say, on that bench to meet that state statute. Could be a head coach of another one of your the school's programs. And that's something I would want to be aware of if that does occur. But you cannot just put an assistant in there acting as the certified head coach if they have not met state statute and those requirements. Doesn't mean that they couldn't be acting as the head coach when it comes to the strategies of the game or managing the bench. But you do need that certified head coach there. And I would say on the bench for hockey, that would be one of those 3 coaches that would be on the bench. All right. Again, make sure that that official lineup is on that score sheet prior to the contest of the section. So whatever they turn in for that roster, that's prior to the game. Your official roster for the section tournament is that stat sheet or is that score sheet prior to the first game. And that is the case for all of our sports, right? Anything that has changed beyond from there, that becomes their official roster for the section tournament. All right.
Hey,
So,
Bob.
Yes.
Matt Matson, I assume an AD could take over if there was a last minute coach got sick on the way, got COVID the day of. An AD who is up to date on their coaching personnel could also be on the bench.
Absolutely. I think the key to what you said, Matt, is that they're up to date and have met those requirements.
Thank you.
Yep. Nope. Really good question. So one thing that we will always recommend is if they're not sure about a student athlete and they want to use them in that section tournament, put them on that roster, even if they're unable to play, right? One of those 20, if they're unable to play or they're going to come back from a violation, whatever the case may be, as opposed to switching, changing those rosters. Understand what it takes to actually change that roster. If there is a change in that roster, you would sub out according to a medical documentation from the doctor, right? Subbing a student out, entering another. If that injured player is to return back, they would need to be cleared again, right, to enter back into that section tournament. And the student that replaced them would then be removed again for that contest. All right. Section tournament roster, the official roster is separate from state, right? So if a student athlete due to an injury or a violation, so on and so forth, is able to come back following the section tournament, you can change your roster again in between rounds of postseason play. All right. Coaches and schools have the ability to do so. This doesn't happen very much in hockey, but it could be a situation with a manager. For postseason play, including section tournaments, share this with your schools. If you have an ineligible athlete due to grades, due to chemicals, code of conduct, discipline, whatever the case may be, they may not be on that bench. All right. Only students eligible to participate can be on that bench, and that would include managers as well. All right. Especially when we get into that state tournament, we're on television. There's a couple of situations that we've had in the past where all of a sudden we find out a student is ineligible, yet they're on that bench in some way, shape, or form. Right. We talked about COVID. Follow the isolation or the quarantine guidance from the CDC in order to move forward. Whitney, Jeff, do you want to unmute and ask your question?
Yeah, we have so many schools now with certified athletic trainers, and I know that a lot of times they'll try to write an excuse, medical excuse from the certified trainer. Is that acceptable from the certified trainer, or does it need to be a physician or an MD?
I think the ATCs or the athletic trainers, their role has expanded. Laura, we have updated language on that. I don't know if you can speak to that or not, but it does give them more authority if they held a student out for a reason, potentially, could potentially also clear them. If a student athlete goes to a doctor for whatever the injury is and says they're unable to participate for 2 to 3 days, it would need to be that doctor that should clear them to come back into that contest. Concussions with is probably our most common one. And again, if a trainer is acting as that healthcare provider in that situation, I believe they do have the authority to go ahead and clear them to come back for participation. Susie and Laura, maybe that's something we get out, whatever that updated language is. I think I'm speaking it to it correctly, but maybe we get that out to this group. Looks like Laura is sharing it in that link.
Remember,
It was a bylaw interpretation that sports medicine did in early November. And I just pasted that link directly to the document. Is that what you're thinking about, Whit?
well, yeah, and I was the one that, our school was the one that had that problem. We had a doctor that here at the Mayo Clinic that did a surgery on a kid, fractured collarbone, and the doctor that actually did the surgery wouldn't release him, and they went to get another, like a second and third opinion. They did release them finally, because you guys changed the protocols, I think, on this note. The student subsequently re-broke the collarbone, by the way. I don't even know if I've told the league that. He did re-break the collarbone a couple of weeks down the road in the same spot that the surgery was performed, but obviously that was a doctor, then released to another doctor, and we never even got into the trainer piece of it. But, my question too was the trainer, because we all have certified trainers that, say you can't go due to they in most cases take care of concussions and everything else right at your school. So I think it's a twofold question, obviously.
Yeah, I think that transfer of care, right? Like parents have some rights around that. That's where the language, the interpretation came from sports medicine. Whit, I didn't know that student athlete re-broke their collarbone, but I did hear you say, and I told you so. So I'm going to call you Dr. Whitney from now on. That's very unfortunate. And you're
Yeah, it
in
was a bummer.
a very good place in terms of healthcare down there as well. Those are situations where Whit did a great job of contacting us and helping him work through it. We sent the language and our interpretation, and then that changed as well. That transfer care form, as Susie said, you do have that as well as you're working within your tournaments. Anything else on medical protocols?
Yeah, Bob, Gary Revnick here. Quick question for you, just to clarify, maybe I'm not paying as close attention here this morning as I need to be, but my question is, rosters set 20 players. Maybe a team has 3 or 4 players that are out with COVID at the time of the start of the postseason. Can they put JV players on there to fill out the 20? And then when those players that are coming off of quarantine from COVID, can they re-enter or rejoin the roster maybe in round 2 or 3?
Yeah, I think last year that was a modification that we made. I don't believe that's in place this year, Gary. I think that would be a medical clearance that you would have to have proof of the student athlete being held out due to COVID, doctor's note, right, or a positive test in this case. Insert those JV players, right, because of that. Medical clearance from the doctor saying they're cleared to come back and participate. And then you would have to remove those JV players. I don't believe, I'm not aware of any flexibility that we have just to do I'm going to call it a line change in terms of hockeys on any given day. Follow that medical clearance documentation of adjusting rosters at the section level. Does that make sense, Gary?
Yeah, it makes sense. So basically they can do it. They just need to have the correct documentation, because I'm sure we're going to get asked that as section tournament hosts.
Yep. And the key is this, Gary, if Bob Madison replaces Matt Matson, right? And then, Bob Madison has 3 goals and I'm going to replace Jeff Whitney. I'm going to pull Jeff Whitney off the roster when Matt's able to come back. You cannot do that. If Bob Madison replaces Matt Matson, when Matt Matson is cleared and comes back, Bob Madison needs to be removed from that roster, which would probably be good for any roster, by the way. Right? Does that make sense, Gary?
it makes sense. And if you two guys are on the roster, that team is going to be eliminated immediately.
All right, we'll move on from there, and I appreciate the confidence. All right, let's get into the general information down below. I hope that weather's not an issue inside your arenas, but what happens with travel around the state, you know, inevitably around tournament time, we get these storms, so on and so forth. Making sure that what's your plan in terms of weather. I think now is the time to remind you on girls hockey, for girls hockey, February 18th, we need to have section champions in place, seedings on the 19th. Em and I will be down at the state dance tournament along with some of you as well. So we'll be most likely seeding from the Target Center for girls hockey. Boys hockey, section champions should be in place by Friday, March 4th. Seeding will be on Friday or on Saturday, excuse me, March 5th. Susie, do I have that information correct?
Correct.
All right. Again, merchandising, work through your region secretaries, what you can and cannot have, understand your streaming. Susie, that's something we should probably add to this agenda as well for the future. Know that your streaming has been approved for whatever you're doing for your tournaments or television. In some situations you might have as well. Distribution of state tournament materials has we give you very, very little at the tournaments anymore, but you will get emails following that. Obviously, they're going to get awards at your section level, so on and so forth, but they will get a bunch of information emailed to them immediately after we know who that section champion is. Susie does a great job of that. We'll be monitoring that, so you're ready to go. We're going to have overtimes in our section and state tournaments. I can imagine that we'll have questions around that. It is in your rules and policies. Be aware of it. Just know that you need to switch ends in between that regular ending, game ending session between the regular ending of the game and the overtime, 3 minutes. Then you go to 8, right? Then you go to a 17-minute. Then you take another break, obviously, and then you rinse and repeat, and hopefully, you know, you're ending that game. And it always seems that it's the last game of the night, or when at the least opportune time when these occur. Know what those policies are. Make sure we're switching ends. Make sure we have breaks where needed that have been approved at the sports medicine level. All right. Susie, I think we're at the end of the agenda. I do want to talk about state tournaments just a little bit as you begin to get questions. But before I do so, are there any questions on the information that we've shared at this time?
Yeah, Bob, do we have an idea when section plaques and medals are going to be sent out to the schools, just so we can keep our eye out for them?
You know, that is not something I do have the answer to. I did hear that. I know that they're working on that right now. Rich in our office has a handle on that. Susie, let's make a note and see, maybe we can get this group a potential delivery date as to when and who they're going to, Mark, if that'll help you out.
Hey,
I know they're in
Bob-
process.
Bob, just a heads up, I got my section dance ones yesterday, so I'm guessing they're kind of coming in sequence based on the section tournament dates.
Yep, you are correct, Emmett. I do know that. So they're going in the order of the tournaments. I would imagine, Mark, they're probably just about en route. But Susie, let's make note of that. Let's, we might want to do that for all of our tournaments on a projected weeks in which delivery may occur for those awards.
Got it.
Any other questions? All right, I'm going to give you an update. Obviously, I shouldn't say obviously, for me it's obvious, but many of you have heard of the latest restrictions in Minneapolis, St. Paul, and at the University of Minnesota regarding vaccinations and or proof of negative testing. What we've learned is that the Xcel Energy Center and the Target Center, and I'm assuming the U are going to be very, very similar. Our student athletes and the support staff, I'm going to call them, tournament support, will not need to show proof of vaccination at our state tournaments. All right. That would include our officials, our game workers, so on and so forth. When they get to the state tournament at the XL Energy Center, it's going to look very much far more similar to last year than previous years. So that I'm going to go back and call that competitive pod. Your coaches, your student athletes, your managers, anybody on that team is going to have limited ability to stay in that arena down, I'm going to call it on the lower bowl, right? When they're down there, they act as one of our athletes. Again, the restriction doesn't necessarily apply. Masking in and out of the arena will be required. All right. When you're not participating, you will be masked. Once you get onto that ice sheet or in the bench, you will not have to adhere to their masking policy. When you get off that ice, get into the hallways or that lower competitive bowl, you will be masked. All right. The restrictions around the vaccinations and or the proof of a negative test, they're calling that temporary. It's 40 days. That puts us right through the girls hockey tournament. All right. So this will be in place. My understanding is for our girls hockey tournament, could change again for the boys. If Jeff Whitney's Mayo team qualifies for the girls tournament, they compete in the game. They have to leave shortly after. They may return to the hotel room, do whatever that they need to do. They could come back to the game and observe or spectate. But if they come back as a spectator, they will then need to show proof of vaccination and or a negative test within 72 hours. So the easiest way for me to think of it is this. When you're an athlete, when you're participating or in that lower bowl, the expectations are different than when you are a spectator in the seating or in one of the different concourses of the arena. All right, so they need to remain separate. So we don't have students going upstairs with parents and or in the spectators and then down below. Remember that this is a food and beverage industry standard and requirement, right? We need to work with these facilities to make sure that we're not violating that requirement to preserve our tournaments and making sure we have the opportunity to compete in those venues. Now, the reason that I mentioned that is what are your practices going to be at your arenas, right? Many of you have, you're participating at high seeds and sections, so on and so forth, or a neutral site. I would say that you follow the requirements of your building, but also understand what you're going to experience when you get to a state tournament. So as questions come to you from coaches, don't answer them if you can't and say, this is pretty fluid. Bob will be in touch in terms of what the requirements were. Much like last year for hockey, we're going to have our admin reps there, right? This is something we did last year and it worked very, very well for hockey at the state tournaments. So there will need to be an admin rep that comes in with that team that will assist in managing and making sure we need to get our individuals and our teams to the end of this tournament in a way that hopefully is going to be as easy as possible. That's what we've learned from our arenas, from St. Paul, from Minneapolis. Interpretations continue to come out as that information comes out, and we believe it's not going to change, for a period of time at least. Laura, correct me if I'm wrong, but we'll push that out to you. I'm looking at Scott up in East Grand, right? And Scott's going, boy, if our spectators are coming to St. Paul for any tournament, our residents or our parents or our community members need to be aware of that, right? That could be really different than what it is in East Grand Forks. I think the tournament that we're all wondering about is what does wrestling look like with the number of individuals that are at that tournament, where they come from. That is outside the 40 days, but it's only the week after our girls tournament for hockey. I'm going to expect that it looks more similar than different. Conversations that we're having as well is consistency in the tournaments, right? So even if some of those restrictions change, how do our tournaments look similar in terms of the experience for our student athletes? We're going to give them the best experience possible in our hockey tournaments. Do your best to make sure wherever you're playing, that you are consistent in what the expectations are from the school's perspective, student athletes' perspective, coaches' perspectives. Again, when they get to the state tournament, understand they will be masked in and out of the arena. The good thing is I think we have more access to locker rooms than we did last year. But the NHL is still not too far in the rearview mirror where they had a shutdown. I think it was 10 days in terms of games due to COVID with their teams. So understand we're still in the pandemic. I'm hoping that the trajectory of the Omicron variant changes here before we get to our tournaments. If any of the guidance or restriction changes, we'll get that information out to you ASAP. I share that only to you as background as to when you get questions as to where we're at with our current guidance and what we're hearing from our cities and our facilities that we'll be working in. Any questions? Must be awfully good today, Susie.
Doing great.
All right. Let's pull up those best practices management keys, making sure they're aware of that document. Just want to run through that just to make sure that there's anything missing here. Again, this looks very similar to what you already have. You can keep scrolling there, Susie. Feel free to look through that. Understand our criteria for seating as well. If you need help with that, that's something that's located in your rules and policies as well. Otherwise, information should be very similar to what we just talked about in that agenda. You can keep scrolling down. You're seeing a little more detail there around youth hockey teams and sponsorships. Again, any of that must be approved through the region secretary. We should not have youth hockey teams out for national anthems, warm-ups, anything like that prior to or during a section contest. Again, remember any game DQs for student athletes and or coaches, we would want to be aware of that. You can keep scrolling down there. Again, refer back to this, utilize that agenda, share any of this information with your site managers if need be. I recommend that communication with your coaches prior to that tournament well in advance so they understand what those expectations are. Otherwise, one last chance for any questions and or comments. Emmett, if you would just hang on after this meeting for a quick, just a quick conversation that I have. It's actually about baseball, not hockey. Otherwise, I'm going to allow you to leave here today. If there are no further questions, use those resources. That includes Susie and myself when it comes to hockey. We're going to do all we can to assist you to host a great tournament. Looking forward to getting down back to St. Paul for our state tournaments. Good luck with all your section tournaments, and let's get those section champions in place when needed. And let's get that information so we're ready to roll in St. Paul. Otherwise, have a great day here, and good luck with everything. Let us know how we can help you. Emmett, just hang on if you would.